Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon and welcome to the first stream from the Lawhammer channel of 2025. That feels like the future. I feel old. Can I be heard? That's the first big question. I've been completely rewiring my setup at this side because I've got myself a big, huge, massive drawing screen over here. And I've got my old camera currently in place, which we're using just now, but I've got a new one as well. So hopefully the next time we start streaming, we will have a slightly better picture of me. This one's probably a bit grainy and a bit crawly, but I'll live with that for the day. Hello everyone. Apparently I can be heard. For example, we can hear you, says Schmidt. And Swedgen says, hello all. Yes, audible. Good to hear. The Unseen Archives, loud and clear, Mr. Law. Good to hear from you. And good to hear from you too. So, obviously, today we were planning to do a Lorebeards with Joseph Bugman. And we've been planning that episode since last year. It's slipped for one reason or another every single week. But given that I am... well enough today to do a stream, I figured, why the hell not? Let's do one. I have nothing planned. Literally nothing. We are just here to sit down and chat and chill about 2025 and any other questions you might throw my way. Now, that being the case, as is always the case, if we have any super chats coming in, I will bring those up first. Other than that, this is just a general chat. Ask me any questions that come your way. If you want to know what I got for Christmas, you can do so. If you have a burning question about something in Lawhammer or something the Lorebeards haven't covered yet, then do feel free to ask. So let's start off with Sean Schultz. Hey Sean, have you purified your Nurgle blood? For those of you who don't know, I am just chronically, perpetually ill, and I've been pretty ill for a pretty long time. But today I have energy and I am off. So that being the case, let's just push Nurgle aside, pretend he doesn't exist, and concentrate upon our prayers of Shalia instead. So do we have any questions? Schmidt pops in. How was your Christmas and New Year? It was really good. We do something with our Christmas that most people don't, and that's that we ban everybody on Christmas Day. We don't have anyone at all in our house except for our family, so that meant it was my two kids, Lindsay, obviously, and myself, and we just have a really relaxing day where we have our meal, we open all of our presents, we have a laugh, we almost certainly watch Doctor Who, regardless of how bad it may be this year. And although this year I feel it was pretty decent for you Whovians out there, I rather enjoyed it. But yeah, Christmas was really good. I got a lot of really nice stuff, including some of the new Warhammer-y goodies for Old World that I didn't yet have. So that got added to my big long roster of books that I now own. And I also got myself a really big, enormously expensive drawing pad, which is quite frankly bonkers in terms of how much it cost Lindsay to buy for me. So all I can say is thanks very much, Lindsay. I've already started using that for a whole host of things, and I'm looking forward to showing that over on the Lawhammer side and in other places too. So yeah, that was good. My New Year's was a relatively close, intimate party with games being played all the way through till the bells rang. We had Andy Leask over and a bunch of other people. His family were over, him and his wife and his sister. And it was just really nice. Playing games, kicking back, having fun. So what's not to love? It was, all in all, a really nice time. Good to see you, Andy. Indeed. Good to see you as well, old man Zola. Hope all in your life are well. Yes, they are. I mean, I'm as well as I can be, given that I'm not very well. But yes, yeah, pretty well. Woo, 3 months. Luna berries. That's an absolutely marvelous thing to say. I'm not quite sure what you're referencing, although happy 2035. Yeah, quite. Baron von Bastard, thanks very much for the super chat. Hello, fabulous beard man. Hello in turn. I don't want to say what you've got in that facial area on your side. I am hosting a cookout. Should I hire Grom or Scrag as my grill master? Well, it depends who you are going to be feeding. If you've got yourself people without much discerning taste, either will do. Grom, Out of the two, Scrag is certainly the one who's going to be doing more cooking and being involved with it. The Grom loves to eat aspect of him is very much played up in Total War and isn't really a thing on the Warhammer side. On the Warhammer side, he's just big because he's got that troll inside him, that troll meat that's constantly growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. In many respects, he doesn't even need to eat anymore. He is enormous because of the issues that lie within him, not because he has huge appetites, although one presumes that he might do so as well. So I'd probably go for Scrag out of the two. Hey, Aleph Flux! Happy holidays and New Year's, he says. The first session of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, 4th campaign you inspired. I'm running. Starts in an hour. In an hour. OMG. I hope it goes well. Do tell me what you're running and do tell me how it goes. Drop over into the Lawhammer Discord and do ping me. Give me a quick ping. I'm quite happy for you to at me just so I can see how it went. I'm very excited for you. I hope it goes well. If you have watched our first Lawhammer session all the way back a year and a bit ago now. Wow, it's been going for a wee while. Yeah, you'll get an idea of what it was like for our first session, although to be absolutely truthful, that wasn't our first session. We'd been playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay for about a year by that point, because we decided that we'd let all of our characters embed and get to know each other first before we went live, and it also gave everybody an opportunity to get to know the game a bit, get to know each other a bit, rather than doing that live on stream, which if it was our second or third campaign, it would have been fine doing it live on stream, but it was the first time any of these people really had gone live role-playing, so we didn't want to be an absolute shock to their system. I hope your first game goes well, because, you know, awesome. Yay! Magladroth, hey! Thank you very much. Hope you're doing well. I am. Making all 9 mortarchs for D&D camp. Oh, interesting. For a D&D campaign, long story. And I was wondering your thoughts. Mortarch of Forging, a dwarf spirit. Clan swore to Nagash when he was king. And Mortarch beast, zombie dragon. So, before I say what I'm going to say, I will give a very strong your hammer, as in whatever you do in your games is perfect and works. I personally keep Nagash away from dwarf spirits for a variety of reasons for my own games. So I probably wouldn't make such a stubborn spirit be a core component of what Nagash's first mortarchs were. But that would be for my game. For your game, go wild with it. I quite like the idea of perhaps a clan that swears to Nagash, although the story for that would have to be something pretty unique, because why would a clan of dwarves swear to Nagash in the first place? Dwarves are notoriously stubborn and notoriously traditional and stuck in their ways. They've come a long way from the almost blanket stereotypical dwarves we had in the very first edition of Warhammer, where in the very first edition of Warhammer, dwarves were trading with goblins, for goodness sake. And then as Warhammer developed and became its own thing over the course of time, as we moved into second, third, and then the big fourth edition where everything changed, dwarves became more and more stubborn and more traditional and more focused upon just doing their thing, the rest of the world be damned. So you would need a really good story. Now, could you write one? Definitely, and I definitely think I could do that. I'm not sure if I'd run with that as a mortarch, but you definitely could make it go, and who doesn't love a zombie dragon? Hey, Biofoot, is this the year of the fish people? Probably not. I mean, I want to say yes, because, hey, that's awesome, but, you know, probably not. Right, let's have a quick check to see if we've got any questions as I'm running down. Here we go. Ricardo Andre, population-wise, which elven nation has the most elves? Ulthuan, Nagaroth, or Athaloran? What would be the order? Nagaroth, Ulthuan, then Athaloran, probably. Although you'll find that you'll get very different interpretations in each one of the books. Elves, the high elves arguably could be last. They are definitely dying out, where the dark elves are, if anything, thriving. And there are far more of those than most people realize, but they are so caught up with interscene wars that they very rarely band together in any realistic big underneath the Witch King fashion. But the Dark Elves are probably top of the tier at the moment, which is unexpected for most, particularly because they've got fewer cities. But you've got to remember that they also have big floating cities, the Black Arcs of Nagaroth, that are making their way around the world as well. So that may be a controversial point, particularly given the size of Ulthuan and the size of Laurelorn, but probably Nagaroth, probably Ulthuan, although I could argue Laurelorn, and at the very bottom of it all would probably be the Laurelorn. So yeah, that's something that I'd want to actually do the demographics. If I think about each one of the 10 kingdoms of the High Elves, yeah, they're definitely behind the Dark Elves. And they're almost certainly behind the Wood Elves. It makes me want to do the demographics though, because I've done demographics for the Empire already, and they supported what I wrote when I was writing for Warhammer, but they weren't in any way a law, as in this is my inspiration, which I will overwrite as required for the story or book at hand. But for my own games, I've got a very firm demographics for all of it. Yeah, interesting. An interesting question there. Hey, Dominic, have you and Sotek thought about doing a vid on the Kingdom of Ind? Yeah, well, one of the issues with Ind, Dominic, is that there is either very little written about it or lots of snippets and extras that are sitting in small asides in, for example, Total War Warhammer, or in any one of many small asides inside the army lists. And it's quite clear that they're sort of gearing up towards potentially detailing it. But it hasn't been yet. So our video would almost certainly be and it could be this and it could be that, and this has been mentioned, so it'll probably be this and probably be that. So it would be less of a deep dive into the lore and more of a speculative discussion, which in and of itself could be fun. And I think that we'd have a lot of fun with that. Sotek and I have actually discussed Ind on more than one occasion. We've also discussed Koresh and Nippon and various others as well behind the scenes. Both in terms of what we expect or don't expect, because some things like Nippon seem almost certain. Exactly how they're going to do that, though, is less certain, regardless of what the rumor mills may say out there. So, yeah, we've considered it. We have yet to do it. Moving down to see if I can spot any others. If you are wanting me to answer something, make sure you mark it with question. If you don't, I almost certainly will miss it, because as the comments come in, it's very easy to miss these things. Let's bring up a nice easy one there from Angel to Bry. Angel to Bry? Angel to Bry. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm guessing. Hello, Andy. Hello in return. Happy New Year. And a Happy New Year to you too. Does the wheel of the 8 winds of magic represent opposing winds and ideals, example light and shadow? Does this opposition port over to their wizards and rivalries and friends? Right, so this has been interpreted and reinterpreted and reinterpreted by different Warhammer writers at different times. And it's exceedingly annoying for someone like myself to see new writers come in and ignore what was written before. Sometimes the dominance, the circle of dominance, is very much the next one around, and this is encoded into the winds itself. The Wheel of Magic has been extant for thousands of years in that version. Although if you go with the most recent version as posed in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, it's a relatively new symbol. It's only been going for about 150 years, and the Colleges of Magic claim that they created it. That's demonstrably not true if we look at the wider lore and everything that's been discussed around the Wheel of Magic over time, and how the elves have used the Wheel of Magic as well. So we've got lots of different versions of what it might be, but broadly speaking, when they are opposite, they are seen to be opposing to a degree, and when they are to the let's make sure I get this, the one that is to anti-clockwise is dominant to the one that's clockwise in the circle. Let me just bring the Winds of Magic circle up here so I don't get it wrong. I know white lights at the top, but I very quickly forget which order they're in. Just type that in here. Bring up an image, please. So I've got an image. There we go. So that would mean that light is dominant over gold, gold dominant over green, green dominant over blue, blue dominant over grey, and so on. And that used to have actual rules written directly into the game. And in more than one game, in Dungeon Bowl, for example, the first edition of Dungeon Bowl for Blood Bowl, second edition, as I recall, they had rules in there for the dominance of one college over the others. But they also had the Rainbow College in there. They went back to the original. If we look at the original Winds of Magic, how they're put together, you had the Wheel of Magic, and you had two cones sitting top and bottom towards high magic combining and dark magic mulching them underneath. And there was 10 colleges of magic inside the Dungeon Bowl version of what Warhammer presented. But yeah, broadly speaking, opposing winds, light and shadow, or celestial and amber, they're sort of there, but much more strongly and repeated throughout the various iterations of the background is the idea of one wind being dominant over the next. And if you want to consider how that could apply in your games, the easiest way to do that is simply have spells that are coming from the wind that's dominant are harder to dispel, or it's easier to dispel on the other side, depending on how you prefer to do it. I have a set of rules set up for that already for my game, but that is very much for my game. That's most certainly not the official game. And he is back. Yeah, he is. Yesterday and the day before, I wasn't so back. I was very much curled up in bed going, woe is me. Why? Just why? But today, meh, after a good night's sleep, I'm up and at 'em. Pretty good mood today. Yeah, all is good. Hi Andy. Hi Luigi Super. Thanks very much for the chat. Since you like Michael Moorcock, I do. What do you think of Epic Pooh? Epic Pooh. I personally don't agree at all and think he didn't seem to have read Tolkien. He absolutely had read Tolkien. If you don't know what Epic Pooh is, it's a relatively short essay by Malcolm Moorcock concerning the cozy fiction, as he saw it, that came from J.R.R. Tolkien et al. And it has some pretty epic comments in there about books about animals, for animals, and yeah. I liked it when I was a kid. As I grew up and read Tolkien again and read Michael Moorcock's work again, I kind of agreed with it, but for very different reasons. I think this might actually be worth, rather bizarrely, a stream, because the essay is quite fun and it is enormously controversial for some people, particularly fans of J.R.R. Tolkien, because it kind of tears the fiction of The Lord of the Rings a new one. Quite clearly, Michael Moorcock was not the biggest fan. And the reasons why he wasn't the biggest fan made for an interesting essay. He's revised the essay a couple of times, as I recall, over time. I would need to look into that again, because I can't remember the one that I last read. I last read it about 10 years ago, so my memory of it is pretty dim. But I'm quite convinced. I seem to recall a long time ago on Moorcock's Miscellanea, which was a website on the internet that Mike used to post on quite a bit, and I used to post over there, and we chatted about stuff every once in a while. And he mentioned a couple of revisions that he'd made to it and why he'd made them. So I wouldn't mind taking a look at that. But broadly speaking, Epic Pooh, as in it's basically just Winnie the Pooh. A very simple tale for children with rather simple metaphor laid through it. Lots of people disagree with it deeply, and I think it might make for an interesting conversation in a completely different stream. So what do I think of it? When I was young, I loved it because I didn't like J.R.R. Tolkien, and I didn't like it for very different reasons to the reasons that Michael Moorcock laid out in his essay, but it gave me a different view on Tolkien's work. And as I grew older and came to appreciate it for different reasons, I liked it for very different reasons, and I liked Epic Pooh for different reasons. Many of those reasons were laced in the fact that it existed at all, and it was attacking a well-established view that so many people had, and when they were attacked, they got incredibly defensive rather than viewing things critically. So that in and of itself was fun. So do I like it? Yes. Do I agree with it all? I think I'd need to reread it to be certain. Aleph Flux, given Tamarkan's invasion, how are your dwarves handling Imperial citizenry knowing about the Chorfs? Or do humans think that they were just dwarves? They don't really think that much at all. one of the big mistakes that people make is, when it comes to Warhammer, that is viewing the books from the god view that the books present and going, well, that's it. Everybody knows what happens in this book now because I've seen it. And that's really not what it's like on the ground. If, for example, we take what happened in Visenland, when the Tamarkan horde invaded across and wiped out huge chunks of the south of the empire, slammed into the capital of Sudenland, destroyed it completely, weakening Sudenland entirely, and then preparing to head north towards Nuln because they thought they'd already sacked Nuln and they hadn't. That great chaos horde was not handily separated into chaos dwarves and Nurgle troops and ogres et al. That people were happily spying on, looking at. It was one great horde, and that horde was taken as a whole, and the chaos dwarves were just a part of that. The chaos dwarves are not so much a we saw chaos dwarves, now we know that's true, ha ha ha. It was just horrible demon engines being wielded by armored individuals, many of which were mutants or strange. They were not so much chaos dwarves, they're just part of the horrible horde that was attacking. So in this case, I would not suggest the Imperial citizenry, have any real awareness of it at all. Some individuals will, some very almost certainly intellectualized individuals probably know, but the vast majority just simply don't. They didn't think they were dwarves either, probably. They just thought they were invading chaos nasties that had to be killed. Everything about them was the worst. I don't think it will be as easy as going, they are dwarfs. Okay, moving down. Let's see if... oh, Aleph, again, thank you very much. Enormously appreciated. Knowing your answers change every Ask Me. Yes, they do. What's your favourite Imperial province and a fun fact about it? Oh, and they really do. Right, so at the moment... oh, I've just gone all fuzzy. Right, there we go, I'm back. Yeah, my answers do change every Ask Me Anything. I'm currently deeply entrenched in Hochland because our game, the Lawhammer game, is just on the border of Hochland in the very northern parts, also in the border of Ostland and in the border of Middenland. And I've been working away in the back of my head over all the various bits and bobs that I have. For example, the prime estates of Hochland, which are pretty important. Now, in the era of the empire that my game's set in, which is 2512, Hochland is not an independent province. It is just a province, which means it's part of another grand province. And the grand province it's a part of is the grand province of Talabheim. And Talabheim rules all of Hochland to the north of it. And that, in and of itself, is pretty impressive. It's a pretty big change in comparison to how many people think of Hochland. And the prime estates of Hochland, as in the most important duchies, counties, mostly baronies actually, of Hochland, are all swearing to the elector count of Talabheim. So that in and of itself is fun. But building it up, it's been particularly interesting because I've been attempting to organize the politics in a way that makes sense. So if you know anything about the princedom or the principality of Reichland, you'll know that Altdorf, the principality of Altdorf itself, is split up into smaller provinces, including many duchies. And I'm doing that currently for Talabheim to balance off against the many prime estates that are in the north, so the prime estates of Talabheim and the prime estates of Hochland. And I've been particularly enjoying breaking that down because I did a map of Talabheim a bajillion years ago for 2nd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. It's a really bad map. It was for a book called Terror in Talabheim. And I did a provincial map. So that was all the areas around the city of Talabheim, according to the write-ups that it had. And I'm now splitting that up into all of the internal duchies and similar. So at the moment, my favourite part is Hochland because it's not the Hochland that everybody knows and loves. And I'm currently making sure that I have it all in place for when the Empire goes tits up in our version of the Enemy Within campaign, which is currently about to restart again. Snowsif. Interesting name. Thank you very much for the super chat. I'm starting the Enemy Within campaign in a couple of weeks. Marvelous. I have 6 players. Nice one. One is a spy bear trainer from Kislev. Good. Any thoughts on a side story arc to tie in for the campaign for that PC? Okay, so first, spy. One presumes a spy for Kislev. I would... So I'm going to start off by saying spoilers for the Enemy Within campaign. If you intend to play the Enemy Within campaign, or if you're in the Enemy Within campaign, I'm going to do exceedingly light spoilers now. They are the lightest of the light. They're nothing to do with the main campaign at all, but they are most certainly tied in. One of the things that I think most people don't do wrong, but most people do when they play the Enemy Within campaign. I know I've done it for most of the times I've run it, and that's that they take their players and they simply say, you've arrived here, let's go, and now we're playing the Enemy Within. And the story of the Enemy Within campaign, the great epic march through Reichland and eventually up through into Middenland and then back down towards Reichland and elsewhere. That whole story is a story they stumble into and isn't a story about those characters. So I purposefully, for the Lawhammer version, made the Enemy Within campaign the story about my PCs. And that's loosely what you're asking here. How do you tie them in? How do you make this character from outside of the Empire a core component of this story? And I would say that quite clearly, one of the core parts of the Enemy Within tale is the great civil war that's building, and it's about to crash into open conflict, which means that outside powers like Kislev, for example, are going to be concerned, interested, want to know more about it, and that gives us your in. Our spy from Kislev is there attempting to find information as to what's going down. That gives you an obvious route in. The question then is, how do you get them in at the beginning? Why is the player there? And what is it that this particular bear trainer spy is pursuing with this party? And the obvious answer is the core component, the core story itself. And that's what's happening with the duplicate, the character, right at the very beginning of the campaign. You'll be very aware of that given that you've read it, so I won't go into spoiler territory there, but I'll say that character and spying on that character and the other one makes sense as a route in, and then you can consolidate that after the first set of adventures when you move up to Middenheim, because Middenheim is a perfect place to have ourselves an external ambassador style character from Kislev be there. Indeed, when we, Graham and I were planning the Enemy Within sections in Middenheim, we fully intended to have the Ice Queen show up. In the Lawhammer version, spoilers, she does. That's before she's Ice Queen because her father is still alive, Radiboka. So it gives you an opportunity perhaps for your spy character to then report in. So you can have the core mission being find out what's going on with these crazy people who are destabilizing the Empire, and then have them reporting in near the top part as they move up towards Middenheim. That gives you at least an easy route in. I hope that helps. I have to keep it relatively brief. Brian Anderson, hello. Is Khaine and Khorne the same? No. It was a rumor in first edition. I'm running a first edition campaign for the last 5 years. We are into Dying the Light before finishing Empire in Flames. Yeah, they're absolutely not. There was, in the first edition, when everything was a little bit looser, first edition Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, that is, there was most certainly hints that certain gods were other gods in disguise. And this is reinforced right up to the 8th edition of Warhammer when you take a look at what they did with Ladriel stroke the mess of end times Elven god stuff that happens over in Bretonnia. I won't go into that, not just because of spoilers, but because a lot of it was daft. But most certainly some gods do pose as other gods. Khaine is demonstrably not Khorne in almost all versions of the background now, though. It's not just certain, it's as certain as you can get without basically saying that the entirety of the game is somewhat of a lie and they're all chaos gods anyway. Khaine is very much his own entity. So loosely on this one, the answer is no, but that doesn't mean that for your version of the game, it can't be. As if you've watched any of Lawhammer, you'll know that I go in a variety of different directions with established pieces of lore. And I always do it from the perspective of there's this thing that's said here and this thing's that's said here. How can I combine them and make both work? So you tend to find that the stuff that I add for my game is very rarely against the background or contradicts it. But it is often deeply controversial for those who are deep fans of the lore, because Lawhammer goes to some pretty strange places. So Brian, my general suggestion here is, the answer is yes, if you want it to be. If you go by the established background, no. But that doesn't mean you couldn't come up with a good reason or a good story for conflating the two if you wish to do so. Indeed, I can think of a couple that would work pretty well if necessary. Kuren Shima. Kuren? I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Not counting Nagash's ritual, when did the Warhammer world come closest to defeat chaos once and for all? Were they always doomed as we were told? Right, so the general perspective is, yeah, Warhammer World's always doomed. It's doomed pretty much from the very second the cataclysm occurs, all the way back with the old ones. And if you go with one version of the background, the one that the old world very much hints so strongly that it's pretty much categorically true, that's that the old ones want the Chaos Gods to be born, want the craziness that is the Warhammer world to be the next step. It was all part of the great plan, and that the poor old Slan were left pretty much swimming around in the shallow water, not understanding anything that the old ones wanted at all. Alternatively, the whole thing's a big mess up, and it's just basically waiting for the great pressure of chaos to eventually envelop everything until the world eventually blows up. I remember many conversations during the second Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition era, when I was writing a lot for Warhammer at that stage, and I had quite a number of conversations with Black Library writers, with the editors at Black Library, with people in the studio, and a lot of those conversations were basically, what is Warhammer and how do we best nail down that tone? And one of the most frequently brought up themes was that the clock is ticking and it's 5 minutes to midnight. It's almost at the point where it's going to tick over and everything's going to go boom, but the setting at its core is never quite there until eventually they blow the world up. So all of that is to say, yes, it pretty much was always doomed. Was there any a point where they came close to defeating chaos once and for all? And the answer is pretty variable here. I'd say Nagash's ritual was not close to it. It did not work. It just didn't. And even if it had worked, it would have still been relatively localized in the south of the old world and the north of the Southlands. So the answer to that is Nagash's ritual was not very close. If we look at the 13 Everchosen, we have two different versions of how they infiltrated the world and blew it up at different points. One version starts with the time of Sigmar up to now, so 13 Everchosens in 2,500 years. The other one goes from the Cataclysm, the end of the Cataclysm, all the way up to the end times, which is 13 Everchosens during that time. And for any of them, after they're defeated, to in any way claim that they were close to defeating chaos once and for all, the big one would have to be, did they come close to closing the chaos gates? Because that's all that really matters. And the answer is no. The end of the Cataclysm had the elves et al., but the elves were central to the first version of how it was resolved. Other species were brought in later. But they did the big vortex to suck magic out of the world. And that was a big holding pattern. In no way was that defeating chaos. All that was doing was holding it off. And pretty much the world was doomed from that point onwards, because one day that vortex is going to collapse. And indeed it does. The end times come and everything goes boom. So, my question is going to be relatively nihilistic on this one and say that the actual established background, they were never close to defeating chaos ever. Just never. Ever. And that's really depressing. But that's pretty much what the core background as it currently stands suggests. Tyrant 25, could you rank these by how likely an average human would be to survive a week by themselves? Okay, Lustria, Athel-Loren, the Mountains of Mourne. Mountains of Mourne are quite survivable under a variety of situations because humans are pretty skinny. Ogres tend to be interested in the big kills, and humans are not the big kills. There's not a lot of eating in a human. And humans are clever, which means that they can often talk their way out of situations with ogres. But they're obviously obviously not the only things that are up there. We've got greenskins, we've got horrific monsters, giants, everything else as well. Mountains of Mourne, though, are, other than the fact that they're bigger than the Himalayas, a pretty survivable area. Lustria is a hellhole. It's terrible. Unless you're a local, you're gonna die, because there are not just all manner of jungle awfulness that you would expect in your normal jungle, but it's all come alive and it's magical and mental, and it's trying to kill everything that's making its way through there. Lustria is a magical place, and Lorelorin is the same. Lorelorin, in many respects, is worse. Lorelorin, though, humans are often toyed with by the elves and the spirits that live there in a fashion that means that you could not just survive possibly for a week, you could survive for centuries and then find yourself wandering out somewhere else. It all depends upon the whim of what discovers you. If you happen to be discovered by a spirit of the wood that despises humanity, you are going to be skinned, eviscerated, hung up through the trees, and it's going to be awful. But you're just as likely to find an ancient elven party that's been going on for the last 4 centuries that you get dragged into, and you can party for a century or longer. Good times. That week, it looks really short. Having said that, at the end of that, you're likely to be a sacrifice to some spirit of the wood. So, broadly speaking, I would rank them with Mountains of Mourne being arguably the most survivable, but it's not in any way survivable. It's horrendously cold. There are monsters everywhere. But if you've got the necessary skills and wherewithal, you can hide, survive there relatively easily. It's not like you've got tons of spirits and the actual flora as well as the fauna of the area constantly working against you. Lustria is probably next, then Lorelorin at the end. But Lustria and Lorelorin can easily swap over because Lustria is just a hellhole to visit. But again, if you've got a guide, you can work your way through that with much more ease than Lorelorin, which is just, no, you don't want to go there. You just kind of don't. How would you build a Rune Priestess of Valea? Excuse me while I take a drink to contemplate that. Today I am drinking good old Scottish Bars bubblegum flavoured juice. Well, we're Scottish. We call everything juice. It's not juice. It's fizzy pop. And it is very, very blue. Okay, so... Sean, that's a toughie. And it's a toughie because I had spent some time building up my own rune rules. And they were based on the rules that I wrote for the 2nd edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, because I wrote a whole bunch of dwarf rune rules for that. And my Valaean folks, I did very differently. So, Sean, my answer here is going to be... I would sit down and probably spend a few days coming up with an answer that felt really, really dwarfy, because I've not done it yet. I don't like making off-the-cuff rule builds. I never have done. I like pinning down something that's thematically right. My dwarves, for example, have no real divine magic at all. They worship their gods very differently to humans, my dwarves, in that they do it all through oaths, and those oaths are deeply binding. The oath of the Slayer is binding. The oath of vengeance, the one that Joseph Bugman swears, is binding to their soul. The oath of kingship is binding to their soul. So all of my dwarf religious stuff is bound around oaths. So I think, loosely speaking, that's where I would begin. What oaths are involved in becoming a priestess of Valea, for a want of a better description? And I would try to figure that out in a way that felt deeply characterful and very much hit all the core thematic tones of Warhammer and told a really interesting story. I have not done it yet, though, so my answer is sadly a touch loose there. Diving down there to Michelle Filios. Michelle, I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong. If you were Karl Franz, what would you do? Okay, so Karl Franz is an interesting character in and of himself because he's a character who's been changed and changed and changed again by different versions of the background. We have multiple versions of this emperor, ranging from a very weak, rather pathetic version to a relatively upstanding example of what imperial nobility should be. So that's the two versions that we got back in the 80s. As we move into the 90s, he turns into more of a super heroic individual and one of the finest war generals that the Empire has known, riding his great griffin. And then as we move through the editions of Warhammer from 4th edition up to 8th, he also turns into one of the greatest diplomats, one of the greatest ambassadors, one of the greatest warriors, in fact, he's just peak everything until eventually he's kind of Sigmar reborn. So we have lots of different versions of Karl Franz, all of whom have different ways of dealing with the world. Let's assume that they are all in their own way kind of true. And basically what we're looking at is an individual who is the emperor of the grand provinces of the empire, all of whom squabble and bicker and want to do their own thing. And that we are in the Warhammer world, which is notorious for being corrupted and having corruption at its heart. And there is all of those rumors at the beginning of his rule, as it then develops through his rule, that chaos may be coming back. So what would you do at its heart? Something that Karl Franz never did, and he really should have done, and that's bind the empire together. He just didn't. In all versions of the story, the individual elector counts have absolute freedom in ways that is detrimental to the overall benefit of the empire. If I was Karl Franz, I would marry the Countess of Nuln to bind Nuln and Altdorf together. Or alternatively, I'd marry Katarina Todbringer to the north to bind the north and the south and together. You need to start building bridges, and Karl Franz doesn't. Karl Franz wanders around being a general on the front line, missing the core politics of the empire that have to stay together, meaning that it becomes a fractured mess, stays a fractured mess, and then we move into the end times and it continues to be a fractured mess. So I would be a better emperor, which is potentially controversial for some. Peyton Burrows, hello, thank you very much for the super chat, appreciated. Hello there, Mr. Law, hello in return. Long time watcher, first super chat. Well, I'm delighted that you dropped by. Love your analysis and insights on fantasy, and Dark Deeds is a really fun game. Well, hey, Dark Deeds is indeed a fun game. If you haven't picked it up already out there, do please do so, because we like to eat here in Scotland, and us at Rookery Publications would absolutely love it if you bought yourself at least 12 copies of our lovely game, because it's a lot of fun. And it also looks absolutely gorgeous. Do go check out Mark Gibbons' art. Anyway, moving back to where I was curious about your thoughts about Beastclaw Raider Ogres in Age of Sigmar. So I have an issue with Age of Sigmar, and that is I don't keep up with it. So what are my thoughts about the Beastclaw Raider Ogres? I don't have any, but that doesn't mean that I can't very quickly take a quick look at them. Those are spelling ogres. I love it. Let's go take a quick look. So broadly, I don't keep up with the Age of Sigmar stuff at all, largely because it's a whole other game, and if I started keeping up with it, I would get so sunk into it. I'm a very obsessive person that I'd want to start making it all make sense in the same way that I do for Warhammer, and that would just become a ridiculous, prolonged nightmare for me, because I would read everything and become obsessed by it. I have yet to do that. So broadly speaking, having a look at it, they look like ogres, all right. If you want some opinions, I can always take a look at their list later, but yeah, they look like ogres. But I sadly don't have a lot I can say because I don't know much about them, which feels really sad giving you through the super chat over my way. I will, however, since you did that, go and check them out later so I can have more of an opinion next time. Apologies for that. Magladroth, thank you very much. Left field funny question. Okay. Has there ever been an individual, dwarf greenskin friendship or greenskin that was considered a dwarf friend? The answer is obviously no. But you'll find that if we go all the way back to 1st and 2nd and 3rd edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle, greenskins and dwarves did not have the same enmity that they have today. Indeed, as a spoiler to the Bugman chat, Bugman used to sell his beer to goblins. Get that one. That was a thing. And yes, we'll be covering that when we do the Bugman stream next Sunday. So that'll be next week. So there have been in older versions of the lore, dwarfs and greenskins who not only traded, but sort of got on. But it never reached a point where they were really dwarf friends. When the concept of Devonger, the dwarf friend, came about, so we're talking, what, 3rd edition Warhammer, 1st edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which is where it's first dropped, and then it becomes a proper thing in 4th edition Warhammer from that point onwards. By that point, the Goblin Wars were firmly in place, and the great grudges that the dwarves had towards greenskins as a whole were firmly in place as well, so that came to an end. But as much as it may sound like a funny left field question, in early versions of the lore, very, very early versions of it, this definitely could actually be a thing. Who'd have thought, eh? Yeah, Brock 6000, Happy New Year, Andy. Thank you very much. Happy New Year to you too. It seems like the Laurelorn elves dominate control forest spirits more than working with them, the Grey Lords. Wouldn't that rankle Laurelorn elves, although they've been allies? Yeah, so I'm just going to say that I didn't like how Laurelorn was handled. I created the new version of the Eoneer for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. And I had a pretty big write-up in place. And I left the job. So I passed over the writing for Laurelorn over to a chap called Jude Hornborg. And it was developed, I believe, by B. Sherry. And they went and did their own thing. Now, the reason I didn't like what they did is because it didn't match what I did. And that's it. I mean, that doesn't mean it was bad. It just means that it didn't do what I wanted it to do. So thus, I didn't like it. I'm just going to do my own thing. My thing was much bigger and much Warhammerier and much more dialed up to 11. Where I had a pair of twin monarchs that ruled from the Laurelorn, both of whom were avatars of elven gods, doing their own thing. But this whole idea of Grey Lords, it's very 1st edition Warhammer, and it felt like an attempt to try and make the Dark Elves and the Wood Elves and the High Elves, loosely speaking, I wasn't that keen. Would it rankle Laurelorn Elves? Probably yes. Though they've been allies, but yeah, you're right. But I don't think that's a bad thing because different factions don't need to like each other. And they can really disagree with how certain things should and could be handled. So I'm cool with that. I'm cool with the entire write-up. It's just not what I wanted it to be. So, yeah, I think your view isn't wrong, but I'm absolutely certain that with a little bit of thought, you could very easily repitch that and have them feeling like they could work together too. But it would take a little bit of work. Broadly speaking, I agree with you using the version that was presented in whatever book it was, Archives, whatever, for their version of the Laurelorn. Yeah. Okay, next it is Baron von Bastard again. Thank you very much. Which magic user do you think would win against the most slan generations in a gauntlet-style set of magic duels, and how far could they go? Wow. Okay, so there are some super powerful magic users in the Warhammer world. And some of them are known in terms of their stats. Some of them are not. And we have the obvious candidates, our Nagashes of the world, arguably our Teclis. Teclis is super young as Elven mages go. Our Witch King, who arguably should be at least, if not more powerful than him, with ease. But Teclis is a prodigy. Then obviously we've got our dragons. Wow, think over in Cathay. And there's going to be a host of other characters from other parts of the Warhammer world as well. If we look at individual magic items, though, they can sometimes do things that mean that magical duels are deeply unfair. For example, the Staff of Volans, which is the artifact given to the Patriarch of the 8 Colleges of Magic. It's had different versions of rules, but most of the rules say, I cast a spell and you can't stop it. And that can mean that any wizard duel can come to an end swiftly, even when it's a less powerful wizard that may be going up against them. So magic artifacts come into bear, but if we're just talking raw power, the one who's most likely to go against the most slan generations in a gauntlet style set of magic duels is probably Nagash. I know it's the obvious one to say, but that's because Nagash is effectively a god. And in many respects, the old slan are kind of similar in their capabilities. Nagash could work his way through several, but it would require a story that makes sense of it. And that story might mean that Nagash has either an absolute disadvantage or a strong advantage, depending upon where they meet, how they meet, exactly how it all goes down. But out of the undead, Nagash wins. Out of the high elves, Teclis wins. Out of the dark elves, good old Witch King. Over in the Empire, whoever the Supreme Patriarch of the day is, almost certainly. If we go over to Kislev, the Ice Queen just isn't on the same level, and she's pretty much the peak there. I mean, Ostankia and where she sits nowadays, maybe, but again, probably not. Ogres, no. Chaos, the Greater Demons of Chaos would do pretty well. Your Kairos Fate Weavers of the world, or our high-level Igrimvan Horseman types, they do pretty well. Really, if you go through the factions, go for the most powerful wizard, you've got your best example in each faction there. Greenskins, yeah, probably not. They need pretty much an entire army to support them. So yeah, let's just stick with Nagash. Hendrik, thank you very much. Azure Shadow. Hi Andy, just sharing. PC in my game is taking Taal Priest Career, nice. So excited. Yeah, nice one. We'll show him dual nature of Taal Kurnous. Same, yet not as he gets dreams. My other plans are crazy and I blame you. I approve of crazy plans. I love it. So Taal and Kurnous are interesting facets of perhaps the same deity or perhaps different deities. Back when we were doing the Tome of Salvation for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition, Taal and Kurnous were two completely separate deities, and that's the human Kurnous rather than Kurnous on the Elven side, and that caused some mighty confusion for some of the writers, but they were definitely posed as separate deities, but one writer combined them and said that they were just different facets of the same god. So hey, it's up to you what you do with it. Quite excited to hear what you do though, so do make sure you make a post somewhere over in the Warhammer Discord, because I do like knowing what everyone else is doing with their stuff. Oh man, Zola, thank you very much, appreciated. Could half-orcs be brought back into Warhammer as humans infected with spores that make greenskins? Like how, yeah, fungi can infect, yeah. Was wondering how you'd handle them, yeah. Thank you for all you do. So, Oman Zola, when the old world did its very first announcement saying, we're doing the thing, we're bringing the game back, they mentioned half-orcs. And my first thought was, ooh, controversial. Because half-orcs as a setup had been, at that point, relegated back to the previous era when orcs were a species that had male and female and could also interbreed with some of the other Warhammer species, such as humans, meaning that orcs weren't, strictly speaking, necessarily a separate species. They were more of a race of humans in some respects. It creates a very different background. And the second I saw that, my first thought was, oh, if you're doing that, how? And I couldn't help but puzzle over different ways that you could do it. And this is probably the one I'd go with, because I think this makes for potentially a super fascinating extra faction, which is humans that are thoroughly caught up with and infected by the spores of the greenskins. I played with this a few times in my various roleplay games. You tend to find, for example, that all of the greenskins in my games, they cause infected wounds, and it's a fungal infection, effectively, and that can kill. A human who gets wounded by orcs will often die weeks, months later from the infections that they've got inside them. And I'd done that several times in my game. I had different versions of infections. I had some PCs taken out for like 2 or 3 months just because they faced greenskins. The greenskin were a terrible, horrific enemy to face in those campaigns. And a natural next step would be what if they became something else, and you start pulling up your standard zombie tropes, or alternatively your Last of Us tropes, or coming up with a very different form of half-orc, and possibly the aggressive nature of the orc fungal infection, what it could do to other species. I would look for, if they did take that route, you would need to explain why it didn't always happen. There would need to be an explanation as to what was happening in this instance and didn't in other instances. What is going on here? Was it something that was instigated rather than something that happened naturally? Was it something that happened because of the winds of magic integrating, or with Wa magic somehow mixing up with everything else? There's lots of different stories you could have, but ultimately you'd need to have a pretty good story to explain where this community or these individuals, these half-orcs, came from. But do I think that this could work? I absolutely do, and have considered it myself, because I think it's actually not a bad idea. The Warhammer world has got space for almost any type of fantasy mixture, because it's got all of the ingredients there to say, yes, this can happen under these circumstances. All you need to do is tell a good story. And yeah, I think there's potentially a really good story there. Stosif again, thank you very much, appreciated. You're the best. Oh, thanks. I'll adjust my tie. Thank you for sharing your decades of passion and knowledge in Warhammer Fantasy Universe. I appreciate hearing your opinion and thoughts on all of it. Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks. It's something I've been doing for a long time. I've said this tale before, but whenever something like this comes up, I'm always reminded of something that one of my old area managers said to me when I was a manager in Games Workshop a long time ago. A lovely chap called Ian Hensel, he used to manage the Newcastle shop 1,000 years ago. And he came up, and I was talking about, this is the second time I was in Games Workshop, and I was talking about resigning for the second time. And he was like, Andy, you can't resign. And I was like, why? He said, because Games Workshop and Warhammer is sunk through you completely. If I cut you open with an axe, if I sawed you in half, there would be Games Workshop written through the middle of your body. And a similar tale came from, of all people, my mum. When I left home, my mum had a piece of advice for me. So this is me at the fresh face of 18 years old. I'm moving down to work for Games Workshop. I'd had 2 interviews, one interview in Aberdeen, then one in Nottingham, which had lasted for a week, which was super fun. I got to try all different parts. I got to sit in the studio, got to go to mail order, got to sit in direct sales, sat in direct sales for a full day and a half selling Dark Millennium all the way back for Warhammer 40k second edition, sending them to the retail accounts. And my mum said to me, you know, when you leave home, you're almost certain to find someone, and whoever it is that you find, they've got to realize that they're not just marrying you, they're marrying Games Workshop. Fortunately, I am married to someone who is a total Warhammer fan and roleplays Warhammer every week with me, so it looks like we landed in the right place. Thanks very much for the super chat. Appreciated. Aquicone? Oh dear. I apologize for mangling your name. Hi, Andy. Hi. I'm making an army of ghouls from an unfortunate orphanage. Excellent, with wooden swords, toys and such. Oh, yuck. Does it make sense for them to have enough awareness to not attack children because of vague memories of their past? Absolutely. Ghouls are one of those poorly detailed species. Now, we had a stream obviously on ghouls not long ago. Sotek and I, go watch that if you haven't done so already. And many first generation ghouls, as in ghouls that were not born ghouls. So ghouls that have become ghouls because they have sunk down into cannibalism and their despair and become the horrible entities that are ghouls. Whilst they are entirely bestial, some of the best tales are when you can somehow tap into some shred of humanity that might be left within them. And I think this is a super fun way of doing it. Ultimately, what makes for a cool tale? And does that make for a cool story? Yeah, it does. I think that's a great idea. So yeah, I would definitely run with that. It's horrible, but I would definitely run with that one. Cole Patterson, is there a people in the Border Princes based on Greeks? Right? No, pardon me. There is. I missed the there. People and the Greeks, right? What do we know about this people? Would base them on late Byzantine Greeks work? Yes, it would. And sadly, this is something that the lore has jumped around and badly developed. Different writers for Warhammer have looked at the Border Princes and gone, oh, wait a minute, shouldn't we use this as some form of cradle of civilization? And whether it's Kypris, which has been mentioned in more than one version of the Border Princes as one of the few princedoms that are older than the Empire that lasted all the way through, but in various versions of Warhammer either does exist or disappeared hundreds of years ago. In my version of Warhammer, Kypris still exists as a city, for example, in Lawhammer. It is definitely down there, but it's not what it was long time ago. It's just a city that's been taken over by multiple different families down through the centuries. But yeah, you absolutely can do this. What we know is that different versions of the background tend to look at the Border Princes and say, we don't know what's there, so we're just going to put an Empire character, a Bretonnian character, a Kislev character, a Norse character. They really have screwed up the Border Prince's individual identity. It no longer has one. It's now just a place where people from everywhere else go and have a scrap. And that's where it's devolved into in the modern version of the old world. It is nothing more than a place for armies from everywhere else that have a big fight, which very much fulfills a purpose, but it takes away the idea of its own ancient potential history. So yeah, if you want to base them on late Byzantine Greeks, yeah, that would work. That would at least give you a good place to go. Not Istanbul, but perhaps Constantinople. I've got an urge to start singing. Let's avoid this. Let's move on to the next question quickly. Baron 1, hey, what is the scope with creating new town villages in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay? I want to create a small town between Altdorf and Ubersreich with canal access. There's not just some scope, there's as much scope as you want. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and the Warhammer world as a whole has always been open, not just for slight embellishments, but massive ones. Entire new towns and cities have been added in some editions of the game and then removed in the next edition. If Games Workshop can do it, so can you. The Warhammer writers over on Black Library, for example, behind the scenes, they were just creating whatever they needed for each individual location as per their needs. They didn't really worry too much about what was already there in previous editions because their editors didn't. Indeed, their editors often said, just make sure that whatever you create matches the current editions of the army lists and doesn't contradict those. The stuff that came before that doesn't really matter anymore. And that really shows if you take a look at many of the Black Library novels, because they're often writing about locations that other books have written about and they don't match at all. So if you want to add extra towns between Altdorf and Ubersreich with canal access, you absolutely can. Now, between Altdorf and Ubersreich, you've really only got one major canal, that's the Grun-Majiggy Canal. I should know, I bloody made it up. It's the one that skips the flats, the marshes there. You could easily set a town. Indeed, I think I've got one on my version of it all. I should go check it up. But yeah, there's as much open space there as you want, because for all some maps may look like they're very full, given the vast areas that they're showing, there is loads of space for you to just add in extra towns and canals. So don't worry about it, Baron. Go wild, make it up as you need, because other Warhammer writers do it. I know I certainly have done in the past, as and when I've been expanding areas, but you tend to find that in my case, I only add stuff when there isn't stuff there already. So I'll go into an area, check everything, see if there's anything there, and if there's no, I'll say, right, so what is there? What do I need to make sure that I've depicted to ensure that it matches everything else? But yeah, go wild. And this is the first that I've spotted from Twitch. Apologies if we've missed any already, because they don't properly show up in the software I'm using. If I have missed one, do make sure you drop a comment and shout at me. Have you ever been making a map and then realized you've missed out something important? Oh yeah. A while ago, I was making the map for the hotel that my Vampire the Masquerade Toreador runs. Got halfway through and then realized I forgot the boiler room. Luckily, it was an easy fix. Oh yeah. I have done this more times than I can care to mention, Dino Man, and thanks very much for the cheer there. I have mapped a lot. I've done everything from Call of Cthulhu 2. I've played so much Vampire, it's ridiculous over the time. I've mapped lots of bits for that too, for Warhammer, for various games over the course of time. And through that, I'll give an example actually. I was commissioned to do a map of a city called Freeport. Freeport was a city that was created by Chris Primus over at Green. It was their first big major setting that Chris made after leaving Wizards of the Coast. And it's a big pirate city. And the second edition of the game had me come along to do the map of this city. And it already had a map. So I used the existing first edition map as my starting point. And I mapped it out. Went through the whole lot. And then when I was about 3/4 of the way through, I found out there was a bunch of expansions that I hadn't read. And I pinged over to Hal Mangold, who is the art director over there. Hal is the best person in the world, by the way. I said, hey, Hal, can I have copies of this book? And he's like, what books? Don't you have copies of those? All right, here you go. And he pinged me over the copies. And it meant there was tons of stuff that I just had not drawn or added. So I was indeed halfway through that map. Had I missed them? Definitely. Did they all need to be added? Absolutely. Did it mean I have to redraw good chunks of that map? Yes. But that's just a part of the process. I've done this with multiple maps over time where I have found that what I thought should be there, when I've read the text very closely, needs to be changed into something else, so thus edits have to be made. It's just part of mapping. Hopefully, by the time you reach the finish, everything's clean. And that's what your art director or whomever is doing the development for the book is there for, because you send it back to them when you're doing it professionally and you say, have I got it right? And normally they say yes. Occasionally they say no, and you're like, oh crap, I've got to do more. Exaggerated swagger. I like your style. What's your opinion on dwarf and elf friendships? I think they're great. How would they be received in pre-post War of the Beard times? I love the idea of Dawi Algi teamwork. Yeah, so Dawi Algi teamwork is obviously, loosely speaking, the elf dwarf situation is based on Tolkien. We know that. And it's pretty lazy in terms of its thinking, but it's got its own story now. And the War of Vengeance, War of the Beard, and all of the fallout from that, it gets dragged out a little bit too much sometimes. It was a very, 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 very long time ago. And because it was so long ago, it in many respects changed dwarf characters, where the dwarf character before that was far more fluid. As time went by and the editions passed by, the War of the Beard took more and more central focus. And because it was so long ago, the dwarf character changed to being so bloody minded they never let anything go. And the War of the Beard was in some respects responsible for this. But does that mean that you can't have dwarf and elf friendships? Absolutely not. One of the best ones, as we know, was good old Snorri and Malekith back in the day, and that's before the War of the Beard. Then if you haven't read those novels, do so, because the Malekith stroke Snorri bro ship is something that should really have been paid off over in the end times, and sadly was not. So Tech and I have discussed this at length. I think we discussed it in the White Dwarf stream in particular, so go check that one out if you haven't done so already. We also popped it up in our end times stream, possibly the second one. I might be wrong on that one, but I think that dwarf and elf friendships make for some of the better ones, because they are always going to be somewhat fraught. They stand against the standard, but ultimately, whenever you are telling stories, or whenever you are telling or creating roleplay situations, you are often talking about the exceptions, the things that people don't expect. What makes this story interesting? Why are we telling it? What are we doing here? So even if someone says that would never happen in your story, it certainly can. So My opinion is, I think they're great. And I think they've got a lot of depth and a lot of promise, and there's lots of different things you can do with them. From somewhere. But where exactly? Thanks very much for the super chat. Hi, Andy. Hiya. Could morose slayers potentially attract Shyish given their deep grief, or would their dwarfishness prevent that? Yes, it would prevent it. This is something that different writers will take a slightly different view on. But if we run with the standard version of dwarves repel magic. They are anti-magic. They do not do what most other creatures do. And that means that when they do things that are responsible for attracting one of the winds, it does so only on the most minuscule of ways, because they themselves do not attract the winds of magic. They have to do things to get the magic to even come close to them. Runes are exceedingly complex, ritualistic ways of channeling the winds of magic into physical form, for example. Dwarves themselves, though, broadly speaking, do not attract the winds. Now, some writers will say the opposite. So do be aware that this is not a consistent thing. When I was writing dwarves, that was always the standard. Consider them somewhat like lodestones, like magnets. They are the opposite of magic. They have the opposite polarity. They push magic away. Now, can you push two magnets together of different poles? Of course you can. You can make them touch, but they're constantly pushing against and trying to get away from that unnatural state. And that's what dwarves are like with magic. It's an unnatural state for them. So, yes, everything about that would, you'd expect, attract Shyish completely. But does it? Probably not. Which is, I think, quite fun. Moving down to Sir Panza. No butt is my second favourite type of butt. Possibly my second favourite also. Hey, Dynaman95! I think the closest dwarf greenship relationship to friends is modern lore would probably be Gorda's backstabber and the Chaos Dwarves, I suppose so. And calling that friendship is, yeah, you've got the Chaos Dwarves, but I was attempting to avoid Chaos Dwarves in answering that one. But yeah, you're probably right. The Chaos Dwarves and any greenskins, and yeah, that friendship is, yeah, I agree with you completely. Thanks very much for that one. Teo Benora, I probably pronounced your name wrong, apologies. Why do dwarves hate orcs more than Chaos or Skaven? Because of the Goblin Wars. Loosely speaking, imagine a great dwarf empire with scores of holes. And then it goes to war with the greenskins, and the greenskins wipe most of them out. Now, do they fight Chaos? Yes. Do they fight Skaven? Yes. But it wasn't the Chaos or Skaven that wiped them out. The horrendous state of affairs that the dwarves are in the modern era is because of the greenskins. And the war that had lasted for centuries, millennia really, was brought to an end by Sigmar Heldenhammer 2,500 years before the end of the world. And even then, most of the holds that were once dwarf held, that are now held by something else, are held by greenskins. They are the enemy that has filled the Book of Grudges more than any other. Skaven, sure, they've been chewing away down at the roots of their holds. And yes, Chaos are an external threat that sometimes is also an internal threat because the enemy is within. But Chaos broadly are something that's on the outside, and their grudges are during the great wars against Chaos or when individuals might fall. It's nothing in comparison to the greenskins. Hopefully that answers your question. Hey, Ace! Nice. How do Khornic cults crop up and impact people? How does Khorne's corruptive influence affect one? I'm looking to create some Khorne cults, but I'm not sure how they would work. Thanks for all you've done for Warhammer. So there's lots of examples of Khorne cults throughout the literature. And we're talking both in terms of the novels and also in the roleplay games, and occasionally they pop up inside the Warhammer battle game as well, although the battle game as a whole tends to focus on chaos rather than the individual cults that might insidiously work their way into one of the civilizations of the old world or indeed anywhere else. Broadly speaking, Khornate cults feed off of rage and violence, and how that might manifest in a variety of different ways. For example, there's a relatively famous, it's been kicking around since the second edition of Warhammer at least, the Red Skull cult that has infiltrated its way into the cult of Ulrich, the god of winter and war. And the oldest families of Ulrichans from the old Teutogen bloodlines. Many of them have been corrupted by this cult, and some of the White Wolves of Ulrich, the most holy figures of Ulrich, have been corrupted to Khorne, and they are there for the bloodshed that you will get in battle. It's a very classic example of how Khorne may manifest. Compare that to, for example, I think it's the Circle of Unmarred Flesh that you'll find down in the Empire in the south. It came from originally Altdorf, moved down to Ubersreich, and moved elsewhere too. The Circle of Unmarred Flesh was all about basically Fight Club and getting beaten up and letting the blood flow. There's lots of different Khornate cults. Loosely speaking, focus on violence, rage, and making people bleed in some fashion or another. If you're looking for classic ways to corrupt people, take a look at any of the... I've got to be careful if I start talking about current modern politics, because everybody's got their own facet. But anyone who's filled with rage today, there's a lot of rage online. That would be the core component of Khornate cults in the modern era where we are today. Where that rage is focused, Khorne cults would begin to manifest. And that's where you should potentially take a look at. Don't just look at them and go, I'm looking at ones that are going to hit people and hurt them. Think about where the rage lies and the people who are impotently raging against the machine, for example. That can be super fun too. Gets a bit close to Zeench sometimes, but yeah, that can be super fun. So they can manifest in lots of ways. I just recommend broadly look up any Khornate cult in any of the roleplay books. That'll give you lots of ideas if you haven't done so already. Peyton Burrows, thank you very much, and you're back again. Here's a little Beastclaw lore tidbit to get you started. Frost Lords aren't chosen like tyrants are. They are voted in by fellow ogres. Really interesting. They have to show that they can provide for their tribe before taking leadership. Interesting. So it's less might is right and more a vote. That would suggest that their ogres are much deeper in terms of their thought. Warhammer ogres are not exactly known for their abstract thinking, their ability to look at a puzzle and come to a conclusion that doesn't involve hitting the puzzle. And the tyrants are tyrants because they're tyrants. They rise, they take control, and no one can stop them. To see them being voted in would be, that's interesting. I would like to read more to see what their psychology is. Why are they going to vote? What if someone who's weaker gets voted in? Do they stick with that purely because they know how to look after their tribe? Does that mean that they would have other ogres supporting them? How does it manifest? Is that basically might is right through a different route, as in it's a group might rather than an individual might? I'm intrigued to know more, Peyton. That one's actually got me interested. Hey, Tyrant25, recent lore blurbs from archives of the Empire and Total War imply that Wood Elves see ogres as basically animals. It's not unfair. Does this feel right to you? Yes, absolutely. Is it right? No. But elves are known for their absolute arrogance. They don't think humans in many respects are much better than animals. So seeing ogres, who are, if anything, a significantly more baser creature as far as the elves are concerned, I think that's absolutely fitting. Ogres are one of my favored species in Warhammer. I've always enjoyed using them. I worked hard to get them included at all in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition because there was a prevalent belief at the time that ogres could never be playable characters. So I did fan-created material for a while just to keep the idea churning away, but eventually it sort of became a thing, and then obviously in 4th Edition we got that in. I commissioned B to literally add them and gave B everything that I had written on them previously and said, there you go, there's a lot you can work from there. As it turns out, a lot of copy pasting went in that job, and that was good. So does that feel right to me? Yes. I don't think that's wrong at all. surprisingly on point, depending exactly, obviously, on how it manifests. General Caster, what are the colour schemes for the Trot troops? I want to paint up some demigryphs as Shalgri and the knights she was with when I had her show up in my game, but I have no idea what colours to use for her or her knights. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Trot's Marauders are the largest Empire-based mercenary company in the Empire, circa 2512, and probably before that too. And Trot's Marauders' universal scheme is black plus something. The companies themselves that comprise the overall mercenary group, there's, I don't know, like 30 odd different companies, all of which are black plus something else, with a black banner with something there, often skull based because Warhammer, and often with the Trot demigryph heraldry sitting in one of the corners as well. But there's not just the Trots that control them, there's also the I forget the name of the Tillian company that the Trots merged with. It'll come back to me later. Doesn't really matter. So loosely, black plus one other thing. Now, Shalgri is the daughter of the current Duke of Tame, who is the leader of all the mercenaries. And she is, I believe, a golden demigryph. I'll see if I've got it in my notes while I'm here. Okay, so I don't have her company down. I've got her heraldry marked as a golden rampant demigryph. It's just a Trot heraldry, but a simplification of it. So if you wish to go with the colours I have, it's golden black. So there you go. That'll maybe be a nice point for you. Yeah, nice. Right, next. Mornington Crescent. If you get infected with greenskin spores, you clearly need to inject bleach to get rid of them. I mean, 4 more years of crazed nonsense coming from Trump about what will work under a certain situation. Imagine. I obviously am not a huge fan of Trump, and if you are, then apologies for my political position. But I absolutely am not. The man is quite clearly, in many respects, an idiot. And bleach to resolve a cold, terrible cold, almost killed me. I was out for 6 months. COVID almost killed me. But that was just nonsense. But I think is beautiful fodder for creating your own interesting idiots within whatever Warhammer campaign you might be in. And I absolutely think there would be some fools who would be absolutely suggesting all manner of crazed versions of cures that may or may not work. Wouldn't work to resolve your greenskin issue. Holy moly. Hey Gideon, if a Slaughtermaster, Butcher or Firebelly challenged a tyrant and won, would they take over the tribe or would they remain in their role and the biggest bruiser take control? Does it vary? I think, Gideon, that the answer here is as variable as the ogres at hand. There are going to be some who have got the desire to take direct control, and they will. You've got to always remember that the distinctions that are made by the fantasy battle game, our Slaughtermaster, Butcher, Firebelly, Tyrant, whatever, are created for that game. And though they have to be discrete from each other for the game. But when we move into the world as it would be, rather than just the nice clean divisions that you get through the battle game, there will be lots of blurring of the lines. And I think this is a fine example of some of the blurrings that could come. And I think some would not be happy to be led by, say, a Firebelly or a Slaughtermaster. There'll be fights, there'll be conflict, and ultimately, as is often the case with the Ogre Kingdoms, might will determine who gets to the top. The biggest belly will win. And the Maw will very much respect that also, because that's what the Maw's all about. Big bellies win. It doesn't really matter if you're a Butcher or a Firebelly or a Slaughtermaster or anything else. But it's also quite likely that they may have their own individual ideologies that mean that they don't want to take control, which is in and of itself quite interesting. They may prefer not to challenge, for example. The situation you're describing here, very much suggests that someone is trying to defeat the other, which means they want to take control. That's how their entire thought process is manifest. So yeah, they probably would. And I'm sure that I could write that a different way if I wanted to keep those things discreet, but I think I prefer not to, because I much prefer shades of grey when you're looking at these things, broadly speaking. Morathi, play Dark Deeds with my friends. We loved it. Yes! And we're the kind of psycho board gamers who play Talisman with almost every expansion. As am I, Morathi, as am I. I am indeed that kind of psycho board gamer. I currently have all my Talisman supplements sitting through in the house. It's one of the few games that aren't in storage at the moment here in Edinburgh, because most of my games are currently in storage. I've only got about 100, 150 games in the house at the moment. All the rest of them are away in storage as we were clearing out one room, sorting out another room, dealing with floods or whatever else it may be. We're just this year going to be taking the stuff that was in storage back into the house somehow. Not entirely sure we're going to make space for it all, because we've got 2 massive storage vans full of games and much more besides that we've got to somehow squeeze back into our house. Not sure we're going to do that. But yes, if you play with all the expansions, Talisman, the FFG one, for example, which is the one that we're currently using, that can take freaking days to play. It's proper daft. Aquo, I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm just going to skip by and say, hey, thanks for the answer. Not a problem at all. You said like I've been huge in getting me back into the hobby mindset. Lovely. Always enjoy these insights. It's a quick one, by the way. A quick one. Of course it is. I can see it now. A quick one. I should have realized. Thank you very much for pointing that one. I won't get it wrong again. Honest. Gets it wrong next time he reads it. Hey Daniel L, thank you very much, very generous. Asking this again for the next provinces. What do Averland and Sudenland look like to define city town? Oh right, so what do Averland and Sudenland look at to define their city, town and village? Stirland, Mootland, and do subordinate provinces in 2512, i.e. Hochland, use their overlords or have they got their own? So this is an ongoing conversation that Daniel L and I have been having over the course of several streams. If you haven't caught up with this conversation, it's loosely speaking, how are cities, towns and villages defined by the great provinces? My Reichland has got a very simple and very clear definition for them. A village is a place with a single temple of Sigmar. If it doesn't have one, it's a hamlet. A town has got at least 3 temples of Sigmar. A city has got a high temple of Sigmar, and so on. And that's how it's defined in Reichland only. If we go over to Talabekland, for example, they don't really dig Sigmar, and exactly how Sigmar's cult influence manifests, well, it just doesn't there. Now, we're now moving over to what do Averland and Sudenland look like? So Averland and Sudenland sit at different sides of the river, and I've not done a Sudenland. I've not even thought of Sudenland. Averland I have considered, but not Sudenland. And do the subordinate provinces of 2512, i.e. Hochland, use the overlords? They do in my game. But they also have, so for example, my Hochland has got its local laws, but they conflict with Talabheim's laws. And if you know anything about Talabheim, it is often called the city of laws. It is such a bureaucratic mess there. And there are multiple definitions for how these things, it's complicated, i.e. and it's complicated because of the history involved. If I was to think on Sudenland, now Sudenland involves some of modern Visenland. Depending on which borders you go with Sudenland, it's got multiple different types of how it's been bordered. It's been bordered with Old Solland exactly. It's been bordered in the south of both Visenland and Solland. So you've got several different provincial histories to draw upon there. The Visenlander group are particularly Sigmar leaning, where the Sollander lot kind of aren't. I haven't figured this one out. So Daniel L, I think this may actually be worth doing as a thread over in the Discord channel, because I'd like to have a good wee think about it, and then we can actually build one and sort it all down. I've got, let me just double check what's currently over on World Anvil. Anvil, Lawhammer, Village. Because I think I've only, if I go to the Lawhammer page, yeah, it's here. Let me have a quick check. Gazetteer of the Empire. Nope, Empire Encyclopedia. Titles, organizations, Franklin Estates. So what I'll probably do is I'll probably have a wee think about it, and I'll do a quick write-up on this actually, because it's something that'll be useful for my game too. So unexpectedly for me, I'm going to say I'll write this one later, because I quite like pinning this down for my game too, because I've definitely considered Averland, but I've not pinned it. Sudenland I've not thought about really deeply at all. At least not that I recall. My memory is not as solid as it used to be, so if in another stream I've said, yes, I've answered this, I have no recollection of it at this moment. I'm going to have to go check my notes. So, yeah, thanks for that one. I'm going to answer it after. J. Oddenhage? Oddenhage. I apologize for mispronouncing your name completely. Hi, Sir Law. Sir J. Are there fun things like flares, flashbangs, thermite, and smoke bombs in the Empire? Yes. Or do inventors just self-expire and fire before they hit the market? So yeah, there's all manner of crazed inventions in the Empire in particular. The Empire, as it moved from the 4th edition of Warhammer through to the 8th, became much more steampunk in its reflections. At one point in about 2008, I was halfway through being commissioned by Black Library to do a background book on all of the crazed war machines of the Empire, many of which had ridiculously overwrought names. And we're going to be discussing the classics, like your Hellblaster volley guns and, you know, your rockets, your cannons and all the rest of it, and your pigeon bombs. But we were also going to be discussing things like flashbangs and bombs and various engineering feats and marvels. So the answer to this is yes. And Empire engineers in particular are going to be the ones that pull this stuff out. Possibly gold wizards too, although theirs will be fueled with the gold wind and probably have magical components involved with them. So yeah, the answer is yes, and good question. And we move on to the Predator Rules 75. Thank you very much. Hi, Andy. Hello in turn. Morning from CA. Morning in return. As a large Orc and Goblins fan, I am a big fan of the head-to-head series and would love to see more. What Orc Goblin do you want to put in a head-to-head and for what reason? So my answer here is going to be, it's going to be slightly unsatisfying because, even as I mull it, I don't play favorites, nor do I really strongly have wants for one thing over another. Every single one of them fascinates me for different reasons, and my answer to this is really broad, as in, if you put one before me, that's the one that I'm going to want to do, and I'm going to settle in and start trying to pick it apart, how it will work and what will happen. So this is really unsatisfying, and I don't like it as an answer, but it's true. All of them is my answer. Every single last one, and the reason for each would be completely different because all of their characters are different, and I would want to see how those characters manifest, exactly what they do when they're put in opposition to something else. So that's a crap answer. So sorry for the Predator Rules, my answer is a crap, all of the above, because I kind of don't really have one that I would particularly focus on. I'm not the guy. I'm really not the guy who has really favourites in Warhammer. Now, that may sound contradictory given earlier I said, oh, ogres, I've got a big, strong like for those. I've got a like for them because everyone else was ignoring them at the time. And they said that we shouldn't be doing them with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So I sat down and I read everything, and they became my subject of the moment, so to speak. So I became fascinated by them. But the same comes for anything that I'm writing about, whether it's writing about the Imperial Navy, or whether I'm writing about the Aeonir, or whether I'm writing about exactly how High Elves and Sea Elves aren't different. They're basically the same thing. And sitting down and discussing how they all manifest. And by the way, sea elves are different to high elves also. It's a complicated, whoops, almost threw my ring away. It's a complicated affair, but I just love whatever's sitting in front of me and whatever I'm focusing on. And that's sadly my answer. It's a bit rubbish. Just going to call this one as I go by. Current because always made me think of Fight Club. It's why we did it in the Warren Fantasy Roleplay. Was it the starter set we put that one in there? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's where I put it. Hey, Dynaman. Oh, big one here. Had an idea for an ogre story and would appreciate your thoughts on it. A chaos ogre of Zeench returns to his tribe and challenges the tyrant and takes it over. He starts to lead the tribe to the Great Maw. However, the protagonist, a Lore of Heaven's Butcher, has a vision of him unleashing the bad taste, basically dropping a chaos artifact into the maw to try and corrupt it. And she and her band of secondary characters have to stop him. I love it. I particularly like the idea as well of the maw effectively providing the visions there. Although you are Lore of Heavensing it a bit. I think I would rather dial in on the maw because the maw has repeatedly made direct contact with many entities in and around it. So I see absolutely no reason that it wouldn't want to be involved there. However, really, if you look at it, you've got a potential set of twists that you could have in there because I actually think possibly the maw would want to eat it. Because, you know, the maw is ravenous. He eats everything. And ultimately, you could even have this big, huge Zeenchy ogre thinking that it's going to be tainting the maw, and ultimately it ends up at the end of the tail just being pushed in. This is Sparta, so to speak. This is Pong Sparta! And down that ogre goes, and it's swallowed by the maw, artifact and all, and with a big belching burp, the maw literally doesn't care. Yeah, I really don't think it's necessarily going to be tainted. It is the greatest devourer of all things, including tiny little ogres from above. So I think you could potentially spin that tail and have an unexpected end to it as well, depending upon exactly how you play with that. The bloat person, hello bloat person. Do other cults make hand signals like Ulricans? Yes, Ulricans do. They do that because they are the gods of rock. That's a stylized Jew or wolf ears, depending upon which version that you want to go with. But the cult of Ulric absolutely does have a symbol. Like the cult of Sigmar has got the twin-tailed comet, which is often reversed as an insult, as we all know that insult here in the UK. That's the twin tail of Sigmar, and other cults do different things too. So the answer to that one is absolutely yes. An Ulric symbol is this, and it has been all the way back since Warhammer, so like late 80s. That's an old symbol. That got mentioned in the Tome of Salvation as well. It often gets forgotten though, because little details like that, writers for the setting often miss, so they don't repin it back into place. I think symbols are one of the fun parts of the gods though, because giving symbolism and different signs gives each of the cults their own unique individual feels, which is fun. Agar89, how terrifying are Grimgor's Immortals as a bodyguard unit? How do you think they would fare in the lore in comparison to other guard units? Well, one of the mistakes of many who view greenskins is they forget how scary they are, because the standard lore often uses them for humor, and greenskins are often deployed for humor, and we forget just how truly terrifying they can be. And I think that in this case, yeah, they would be truly terrifying, and I think they'd fare pretty damn well. Yeah, nasty. Thanks very much for the question. Red Salamander, hope all's well, Andy. It's as well as it can be. Been going through the previous Lorehammer episodes, thoroughly enjoying the series so far. Really like the custom Temple City one. Yeah, that one was quite fun. Rather annoyingly, okay, I'm going to admit something now, which I don't necessarily want to admit, but I'm going to admit it. I saved over the map that I drew during that stream. So all I've got is the low res one that I posted in Discord. Like a bloody idiot. So I'm going to have to redraw that one before we go back to Laquatl. I think that's what it was called. So I'm going to have to redraw that. So this Friday, this Wednesday, pardon me, we won't be doing that. We're going to be doing a different stream. If you jump into our Discord. We've already got a loose conversation up at the moment about what we could do for this Wednesday, Sotek and I, because we're going to be doing something this Wednesday, 10 p.m. UK time. And Sotek and I have already had a discussion. We know what we're going to do if we don't like any of the discussions, but we're hoping that you'll come up with some cool ideas as well, because if you all come up with some cool ideas, we'll go with that instead. But we definitely have an idea. Alrighty, now down to Katep the Ancient. What is the basis for Theoderic Gauser's claim in Marienburg? Is he a descendant of the last ruling family there, or did he just make it up? So there are different versions of the lore here. So let's go with the two most common ones. One is that he's descended from a branch, as in he's not a direct descendant because there wasn't a direct descendant. He's descended from the cousin of the last Prince of Marienburg, Duke of Marienburg, pardon me, Grand Duke of Marienburg at that, who died at the gates of Kislev some 200 years ago. And that's the basis of his claim. The Gauser family is linked through to that, but you'll find that the Nixa family has also been wrapped up with that, and the Gausers and the Nixes of Nordland, that's two of the households up there, they are not that interrelated, and nevertheless both have been given exactly the same claim. So there's some mess up in the background here. There's another one which is basically just this is more of a modern one, but this is more of the Nordland and modern era, where Nordland carries the blade of Westerland, as in the Runefang of Westerland, and Westerland being what the wasteland used to be. So thus, it should be mine, yeah? Yeah? Yeah, one writer went with that. But loosely speaking, your answer here is correct. Both of your descriptions here have been used. But the most common one is he's a descendant. No, he's related to the last ruling family, but he's not the only one. There are definitely others. So, yeah, that's a fun one. Exaggerated swagger. Do you prefer Bretonnia grimmer or nicer? Grimmer. Yeah, I much prefer Grimmer, and there's been various writers who've done that better or less well. I was never really a huge fan of the initial rewrite when it was put in place by Nigel Stillman for the 5th edition of Warhammer. I liked what they were doing broadly, but it was filled with so many twee and jokes and silliness that I found it hard to take it seriously. And Warhammer at that point wasn't taken particularly seriously. If you take a look at many of the illustrations during that era, they were cartoons, actual cartoons in the Warhammer book. It had a different tone in that era, and it wasn't a tone I particularly enjoyed because I was a Warhammer Fantasy roleplay writer primarily, and that's grim and perilous in terms of its tone. I wasn't one of the ones that hated the new version of Bretonnia. The previous version of Bretonnia was obviously a pre-revolutionary France, and it got turned into an Arthurian England, really. You might go, oh no, it's French. Man, bullshit, it is. It's much more of an English version of what it would all be. I was never bothered by that too much, and as the lore developed, I came to love it for what it was. But I think when the 6th edition came along and all that lovely black and white grim, drippy art came out, I much preferred that to the colourful, over-the-top, slightly ridiculous version that we had previously, and it broadly stuck at that. I just wish Bretonnia had got another army list. It just was ignored, and as we moved into 7th and 8th, it never got updated, so we're never really got a full Bretonnia. It is massively behind. You could argue the old world is now doing that, and it is taking leaps and bounds over what was there before. Taking for some controversial decisions, but decisions that to me make absolute sense. For example, the women being involved with the knightly orders. Oh, knightly orders, pardon me, the knights, they're not knightly orders. Which to me makes absolute sense because it's the frickin' Lady of the Lake and you are empowered supermen. When you become a Grail Knight, for example, you have become, as somebody said over on the Discord earlier just today, a super soldier from Marvel, pretty much. And you're not wrong. You pretty much have. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. If you've watched the most recent What If, Captain Carter is ridiculous. And so would many Grail Knights be. And I see no reason why that be limited by anyone's gender, presumed or otherwise. That does overwrite previous versions, but all the later army lists did. So I have no great problem with that. So broadly, I prefer it grimmer. I prefer there to be more tension between the different groups. I don't like the nice and happy king leads over all the knights and everyone does what everyone says in a happy way. It doesn't really make for great stories for me. Although having said that, I think it's important to have contrast, because grim doesn't exist without nice. Because if everything is grim, then nothing is really grim, because everything's just normal. And normal is what you're calling grim, because it's grim in comparison to the real world. I prefer grim for much of the tone, but I also prefer to have something that's contrasted against, which means that everything can't be grim. We can go into that in another stream if necessary, or more questions later. What's the tech level of the Empire farms and artillery? I can't apparently speak anymore. I've seen them portrayed from matchlocks, yes, in some sources, all the way up to percussion caps, yes. I've seen in Vermintide. They also have breech loading cannons, yes, for the same time. So I'm assuming that there might be some breech loaders in the State Army service, right? So, General Caster, the answer to this is yes. The Empire is a huge place, so it's fine for there to be some disparity there, where we've got older technology used in some quarters, cheaper technology used in others, places like Nuln having the edge of the artillery and their weaponry. That all makes sense. But broadly speaking, the Empire... It varies. I'm literally going through the different versions. Yeah, I'm going to bring your comment back up again, because it's actually accurate. Yes. Matchlocks, yes. Percussion caps, yes. They don't have broad rifling. Rifling's left largely to the Hochland long rifles, and it seemed to be an arcane technology that only they've truly mastered. And that seems to be a thing. So they haven't mass-produced rifling outside of Hochland. And even in Hochland, most of the Hochland long rifles are artifacts that are handed down from father to son, from mother to daughter, and so on. From family member to family member, crafted meticulously down through the generations. But other species do have rifling, so it's all a bit of a mess. Particularly because any engineer worth their salt will be able to back engineer that with ease. So... the answer is it's as advanced as the individual writer or miniature maker makes it. And if you're looking for a clean answer for your own roleplay game, I would broadly suggest that whatever you prefer the peak of the technology to be, have that in Nuln and then spread it out from there. In the north and the east of the Empire, you move to the most archaic tech towards moving back to just bows. When you move down towards the south and the west of the Empire, particularly Reichland and Nuln, that's where the technology increases. The cannons that are produced by Middenheim, for example, Middenland as a whole, they mostly come from a town called Schmiedorf on the River Talabek, and they are of much poorer quality, for example, to the cannons that are coming out of, say, Nuln. And the cannons that are coming from Nuln are better than those coming from Altdorf and the ones that are coming from Marienburg. So broadly speaking, your Silicon Valley of technology is Nuln, and then it spreads out from there in a great fan outwards to the furthest reaches in the east and the north having the weakest technology. So broadly speaking, it's an answer almost for your hammer, because trust me, Warhammer will not be consistent on it. Ricky Chapman, playing an ogre. Any recommendations for seasoning a Zeench sorcerer? He's got a fishy bits butt, also cow bits, maybe deep fried. Any advice? I'm slightly confused by the question. I'm going to have to read this one more time. Give me a moment. Hey, Ricky Chapman, let's try one more time. Playing an ogre. Any recommendation for seasoning a Zeench sorcerer? He's got a fishy bits butt, also cow bits, maybe deep fried. Any advice? No, I'm not getting this. I feel like I'm missing something really obvious. Sorry, Ricky. I'm going to have to ask you to refine your question there, because I've got, you're playing an ogre, got that, and seasoning a Zeench sorcerer. Oh, wait a minute, no. Literally, you're wanting to season. Oh no, it's beginning to make sense. I was taking it not as literally as I should have. You are seasoning a Zeench sorcerer. He's got fishy bits, but also cow bits, maybe deep fried. Any advice? As in what seasoning you should use for a Zeench sorcerer? One of the great joys of eating Zeench sorcerers, you never can be quite certain how they're going to taste. They are, after all, sorcerers of change. Is their meat going to be chewy? Is it going to be juicy? Is it going to be luscious? Is it just going to fill your mouth full of yummy flavors, or is it not? You can't be certain. And worse, as you are cooking your Zeench sorcerer, it's quite likely that meat will change its flavor as you go. So even if you happen to be, as an ogre, tasting it as you go, you can't be certain that the finished food will match what you expected as you were doing your cooking. So broadly speaking, the answer for this is there is no certain answer, because each Zeench sorcerer is going to taste different and potentially taste different as you cook it. I hope that's what you're looking for. Hey, Dynaman, reading Araby lore, not a lot of that one, about how they are averse to using gunpowder seems odd. Damn straight it seems odd, considering how large numbers of real-life Middle Eastern gunpowder troops, such as the Janissaries. Yeah. So, I don't just agree with this, I strongly agree with it. The Ottomans, yeah, all of them. The gunpowder empires. I don't just agree with you. I think it's a nonsense. And when Araby is properly organized, that I think will be consigned to history. In the same way that there was no black powder in Kislev. I was literally told that I couldn't add black powder to Kislev at all when I was writing it for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition. So I had to cite them, the existing troops that already were made for Kislev, some of which had black powder. And so we got our birdish wielding chappies in with their guns and their axes. They look quite different to the ones that are in Total War, for example. And I was told I had to stop there. I couldn't have any more black powder at all because Kislev didn't have black powder. I still attest that that's a nonsense, and that it doesn't make sense given their trade routes, given the people they work with, given everything that they are. So I agree with you completely, Dynaman. You're not going to get any pushback from me. Brock 6000, thank you very much, appreciated. Are dwarf magic runes always metal worked into specific symbols? Are there air forms, or could they also be the symbols etched or engraved into a material? Yes, so they are not always metal, and this is something that has been the case since 4th edition Warhammer. There were runes beforehand in 3rd edition Warhammer and 1st edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, particularly when 1st edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay took in 4th edition Warhammer runes as well in its later editions as we move towards stone and steel. But dwarf runes are etched into a variety of different materials, and the more powerful the rune, most commonly the more powerful the material has to be to hold that particular rune. One of the great stories from the Nemesis Crown was Alaric the Mad, one of the greatest runesmiths ever, trying to find a material that would be able to hold a particular rune that he was wishing to inscribe, and in the end he went warpstone, as you do. So the answer to this is no, there's lots of different forms, and I think you'll find that if you move into wider dwarf society, that runes will be manifested in more ways than simply through forging. I think that there will be a host of runes that, for example, could be stitched into banners. And we're not just talking about, metal placards or stone placards with runes put into it, but runes that will be empowered through the stitching and through the making of the tapestry-like banners that they have. So the answer to this is certainly much more broad than is often discussed in some books. Hey, Tyrant25, how tough are Grail Knights? Ridiculously so. Are they equal to Chaos Champions? Yes. In combat, as some sources say, yes, definitely. Grail Knights are actually crazy. It depends again on the version that you go with, but they're your super soldiers. They're also almost immortal, and I don't mean immortal as in they can't die. I mean they just don't tend to grow old. They die through violence rather than through old age. Laurelorn, he's over 100 years old, as I recall off the top of my head, or at least very, very old. He makes Karl Franz look like an itty-bitty child, because Laurelorn also is a Grail Knight, and he's been around for a long time. Yeah, Grail Knights are proper daft. There's different versions of them. I remember when... I remember when, and the name suddenly, David Chart. David Chart was writing the Knights of the Grail for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition. It was generally determined that the Grail Knights were too powerful to actually properly write rules for. So they kind of botched it and didn't bother. In the same way that they decided not to properly write rules for Battle Wizards for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition because the system simply couldn't cope with it on its top tier. And they were right, it couldn't. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition has got more than enough space to cope with top tier crazy badasses like them, but yes, they are more than equal to some Chaos Champions, and they can go toe to toe with them. They're pretty awesome. Moving on down, Mitch there, Mitch Earson, I hope I'm saying that. It could be Larson. Can't quite tell if that's a capital I or a little L. Yeah. Hi Andy, hiya, nice to see you. Just started watching your Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay campaign. Oh, good luck and love it so far. Oh, great. Delighted to hear that. I hope you enjoy it as it goes. It goes to some pretty crazy places in some of the later streams. Do you think Grease's Goldtooth can go toe-to-toe with a Greater Demon? Yeah, he totally can. And top-tier Greater Demons come end times, massive storms of magic. Yeah, probably not. But yes, he could, because Grease's Goldtooth himself would probably swell in those particular events. So yeah, Grease's Goldtooth is often depicted as being one of the larger entities. Yeah, but the larger Greater Demons will pretty much kill everything, because they do. There's a reason it takes a lot to take those things down. Delighted you're enjoying the campaign, though. As a real-life example of an army with varying texts, is Dinoman, though not as much as the Empire, take a look at the text spread on the Russian-Ukraine war. Most stuff from the 70s, 80s with examples from 2010s, even 1910s. Yeah, that's actually not a bad example. We discussed, not this, I say we, it was people who were writing stuff for Warhammer about 15 years ago. What year are we in? 25? It was 15, no, it was longer. It was 20 years ago. Ah, crap, I'm getting old. So 20 years ago, we were discussing the inaccuracies of Empire technology and how it just didn't make sense. And we were happy with it. And we all said that it made sense because you often found that in real life, there was often multiple tech levels being deployed in different wars. And no one ever worked at the top tier all the time. And there was always someone who had a new development, a new thing that they tried to bring to the table. But just because some things were easier to make than others, they just got mass produced and they were the ones that sat in the front line. And I think that this is a beautiful example of what we were discussing, but in a slightly different arena. We're at that point discussing various factions across the 1600s through to the 1800s. But this is, I think, a really good example as well. So thanks for bringing that one up, Dino Man. Like it a lot. And Mornington Crescent. On greenskins being scary, they strike me a bit as the Daleks of Doctor Who. They don't need special tricks. They don't need ridiculously high technology. They just have numbers and raw power, and in sufficient amounts, that's enough. And the Daleks are just the worst. And yeah, I suppose that's well, although the Daleks do have pretty ridiculously high technology and many variations of them. But yeah, the greenskins are often done like that. But having said that, though, the greenskins are not just that. They are not just weird fascist analogies that are supremacists looking to kill everything. And I don't just mean that as in the greenskins are not just the great tide of the Wa. And I would suggest looking at our Black Crag stream for a big discussion between Sotek and I concerning orc civilization and how it isn't always what people expect. It's sometimes a bit more than, just simply attack. Sani, oh, you've done this on purpose. You've given me something I can't pronounce, haven't you? I mean, obviously you haven't. You haven't done this just for me. It's not all about me, apparently. Right, I'm going to give it a go, though. Sani, now, an apostrophe is meant to be a glottal stop. So that'd be n. Nudii, Sani Nudii. I have no idea how to pronounce that. Apologies for pronouncing it incorrectly. Hi Andy, hi, I'm return. Giant dome Huanchi expanding from the inside of time space old one fuckery under the Atalan mountain, mapped like an eye on the path of the old Popsaurus once in a while to hunt foreseen threats. Would it make sense? Okay, let's read that one more time just to double check that it makes sense. So, giant dome of Huanchi, yep. Expanding from the inside, time space old one fuckery, right? Under the Atalan mountains, mapped like an eye. Okay, so we've got like a big eye, big dome on the path of the old ones. Okay, so we're basically creating an inner dimension. This is something that happens in multiple places in Warhammer. The Light College in the Empire, for example, lives inside its own pocket dimension inside Altdorf. So Popsaurus once in a while to hunt for, so out comes to hunt for unforeseen threats. Would that make sense? Yes. The answer is yes. You definitely could make sense of that. Indeed, not only could you make sense of that, there is many examples of things not exactly the same, but at least similar to that within the existing lore. Man, it's interesting how the battle strategies of the Chaos Gods are different opposites than the actual rivalry opposites. So Nurgle is slow and tanky, Slaanesh is swift glass cannons, Khorne is mostly melee, no magic, blunt force, and Zeench is magical range and trickery. Yeah. And it's for me fascinating to see how it's both been kept to its original definition as laid out by the Realms of Chaos books, all the way back in the late 80s, early 90s. And we had the books released in 2 books, and each providing a pair that supposedly was most against each other. And Nurgle and Zeench slapped together and Khorne and Slaanesh slapped together, where you really think Khorne and Zeench should be against each other. And I remember noting it at the time. And I brought this up with Mike Brunton. Now, you might not know who Mike Brunton is. So let's go into an unexpected anecdote here. So Mike Brunton used to be the editor of White Dwarf a million years ago. And he wrote vast screeds of the Realms of Chaos books. And I was meeting with Mike every week because he was going to be working as the editor for the Enemy Within campaign. And very sadly, through the when he was working on the second book, he died. That nevertheless, I've just been struck that I actually got a bit emotional there. Mike was great. Mike was full of massively interesting stories about the foundation of Games Workshop, where it came from, and his contributions to it. And he was deeply irreverent. He had been a writer on the Total War games, not the Warhammer Total War, the Total War Rome games and the medieval games. His ringtone was Jeremy Isaacs, no, Thingy Isaacs, who played, what's his face? Doesn't matter. Let's get to the actual anecdote. We don't need to know about his ringtone being Roman generals swearing like hell. Mike Brunton was asked by me as to why it was the way that it was. And he went, because the books had fallen out of control massively. And they were all brought back under control. And the pairings were sort of semi-justifications, but weren't in any way expected to be solid. He said, I, to this day, would have preferred Slaanesh and Nurgle to be paired off against each other on Khorne and Zeench, because that would have made more sense. It would have been much more apathy versus excess. Anti-magic versus magic. It would have made sense, but that's just not the way the books were and what we were given and what we had to work with. And yeah, the opposites were just made up and had no greater depth at the time, and they've sort of stuck, and he wished they weren't the case anyway. So I always found that interesting. You tend to find that most of the decisions that were made in those early days of Games Workshop writing were just done off the cuff under a tight deadline because something had to be done. And a fine example of this is Graham Davis's recent blog where he was discussing the Lords of Law, the gods of law, and where they came from, and how lots of people have ascribed so many things to them, which Graham did not intend when he first wrote them. They've all been made up by other people at a much later date, and they have granted him much more thought than he ever put into it. He was literally just copy-pasting ideas that had come straight from, well, Michael Moorcock, and indeed the previous versions of the Lords of Law that had been put into Warhammer by two other writers who were just copy-pasting also from Michael Moorcock. So cut a long story short there, those oppositions there were made up off the cuff, and some people regretted them who made them up. Go figure. Right, so I've gone through all my super chats, which is nice. Thank you very much for all those. I'm going to see if I can dive back into some of the other questions, because there was loads of them there that I kind of just skipped over. And I'd like to get into a bunch of those before I jump out of doing my thing. So I'm going to dive through and look for anything that has a big Q on it. And see if I can spot some. So those of you who thought I wasn't going to be answering any of these, you're well wrong. I am going to see if I can dive in and get some of them. Okay, let's see. Question, here's one. The old ones waged worldwide war, manipulated the genetics of various species, shifted the planets, etc. Could all of this have fueled the chaos gods and caused the polar gates to explode? Yes. Indeed, there are many who believe that that's exactly the case. Here's another one. Question, you mentioned in the Lawhammer Discord about 20 winds of magic instead of 8, mentioning Kishil, Ice, Orch, Earth, Sleeve, Liminal, and Shrosh Deep. What ideas for the other winds do you have? I don't just have ideas. In my version of the game, I have got 20 complete winds of magic. It's totally crazy. It is 100% based on Games Workshop stuff, but it is 100% against what Games Workshop pitches with its 8 winds of magic. So that is not something I'm going to really answer, because it's something I'm going to leave for my streams, the Lawhammer streams, to detail. I wouldn't like to spoil those. So sorry, Legion, I won't be spoiling my own streams. Ricardo, Andre, if Magnus winning the Great War against Chaos push the waste back north a bit, was there a genuine chance to defeat Chaos and perhaps close the polar gates? So that's a really interesting question, Ricardo. The answer to that is it depends on the writer who's handling it. Because some writers would say, oh, absolutely, the chaos is pushed back and it all goes back, and that gives them an opportunity to go forward. But they don't, because they take the great deep breath after the conflict and they turn on themselves, or they're too busy consolidating after the war, or licking their wounds or whatever else, and the opportunity passes. That would be one view. Another would be, yeah, no, they've got they can't win. There is no winning. Those gates can't be closed. That would be another route. Different writers will take different answers towards this. If you want to go with the official version of what happens, no. There's never at any point any realistic chance that any force can close the Chaos Gates to North and South Pole. It just never happens. Now, might they change that with a later version of events or a new story? Absolutely. But as it stands, nothing comes close to it. Pretty much at all. It's almost hilarious. Dominic, what's your thoughts on Omens of Destruction downloadable content? I was disappointed in the narrative side of it compared to the earlier one. Sadly, I've not played it yet because I have been too busy doing other things like being ill, writing Games Workshop goodies for my own campaign, or most commonly writing stuff for the Rookery. The being ill has been disappointingly prevalent. I intend to get to it. It's sadly going to have to be a watch this space for me. And there's a cue. If you suddenly took over Malekith's body and found yourself in Nagaroth with all his knowledge and experience and knowledge, what would you do? Well, Ricardo, that's a big one. It depends on the story of what happens at the Flame of Azurin. If we go with the End Times version, then Malekith's just a big crybaby. And given I'm now moving in, I can resolve that. And I know that's a bit of a blanket way of putting it, but really his issues with the burning flame and everything that happened, it just didn't work according to the way it should do. He should go back to the flame and do what he's meant to do. Pretty sore though. Then you've also got what happened to him when Teclis cast him into the realm of chaos. What did he see when he was there? Because he comes back a completely different elf. Completely different. So, the answer to this is, who is Malekith? And you need to decide what your version of Malekith is. If he is just an extreme edgelord, crazy elf, murderous, slave-mongering hellion, then you could just make a different version, but he'd probably end up getting killed by all of those around him for no longer fulfilling what they consider to be his role. Or you could go with a deeper story. I'm going to answer this slightly differently and say that I would like to relight Malekith's story, because I think that it is, as it currently stands, not very well written. And that's not to disparage any of the writers. They were always working with what existed already. I would just like to take it from the start and go, hey, we're doing it again. Because I think he has not necessarily been handled as well as he could have been. He's a deeply interesting character, and we've touched upon that in, for example, the White Dwarf stream, and of course the Malekith stream. Looking down for any more cues down here. Lots of cheers there. Already did those ones. Cute. And Magnus winning the... I've already done this one. That apparently popped up twice. I'm going to continue on, see if we see anything else down here. Cute. And I think you wanted to see this one answered. I hopefully did answer it. Moving down. We're almost up to the current day. And there. Wait a minute. No, do this one first. Do we have anything else there? Here we go. Not sure if you saw my sub message before. I probably didn't. But a recommendation for a horror video game with some top-notch Scottish voice acting still wakes the deep. Oh yeah, I got recommended by this game by someone else as well, and I've not yet looked at it. I have been pretty low maintenance with. I've been playing quite a few video games of late, mostly RPGs I'm catching up on that I missed. After completing Veilguard, I just dived into a bunch of other RPGs that I hadn't quite finished yet. Going through Final Fantasy VII, the remake. Just finished the first of those two games, going on to the second one in a mo. Bizarrely, a large amount of Minecraft, just finishing off my Temple of Ulrich there. But yeah, if you reckon it's good, I shall indeed pick it up. Question: if dwarves repel magic, do they repel Gyron? Yes. If so, how are they alive? Gyron isn't necessary for life, it's just a component of life. Since most people being drained of Gyron is sort of fatal. Yes, that's because they live with Gyron. Dwarves don't. It's a core component of how life works. Warhammer World's not like the real world. It has changed everything because of the way that magic saturates and pollutes everything. If magic was suddenly wiped out from the world, it would be difficult for many of the species. And I think that would be a really horrible denouement for a successful closing of the gates. Close the gates and almost everybody dies. Well, that'd be a horrible way. Only the strongest... most willful, or those whose bodies are particularly... It would be horrible. Gyron allows things that should otherwise not live to live, and that includes mutants, and most of humanity in some fashion or another is mutated to some small degree, and many of them only exist and continue to live because of the Gyron winning through them. This isn't the real world. It's the real world gone mad, and if you take away the madness, it just leaves big holes throughout all the species, and only the dwarves are genetically made to hold off against that. Other species would survive better than others. Elves would be fucked. So yeah, that's a fun one. Watchdog 3079, thanks very much for super chat. Won't ask you to go spoil the other wins beyond, but is there a bigger chance we'll see them introduced properly towards the end or after the enemy within? That will depend upon what the PCs do, Watchdog, and I have the answers there should they be pursued, and that depends upon how they will or will not be pursued. I think that it's quite likely parts of it will come up, and I think it's quite likely that parts of it will end up being explored purely because of some of the plot beats that some of the characters have been pursuing. So I think probably yes. Yeah, probably. Well, the Hawkland stuff be hitting the Patreon. If so, neglected as a province, it is indeed. Also, my favorite Talabine fact. Oh, do I have a favorite Talabine fact? That I hate the map that I did for it. I suppose that's a favorite Talabine fact. Oh God, I hate that map so much. It was made with a mouse, tight deadline. It was horrendous. For a black and white one at that. I pitied the French edition when they had to try and colour that one in because it was not an easy one to colour. Will there be heading Patreon? Yeah, most of the stuff, when it's been outed in stream, will pop up over on the blog. And for those of you who don't follow over on my Patreon blog, it's mostly public in that you don't need to have spent money or throw money at us to get access to it. Most of it's public. The stuff that's all access tends to be stuff that's the secrets from the campaign, or alternatively alternative versions of maps that I'm pushing out, or experimental rules that I'm playing with, or something similar. But yeah, loosely speaking, yeah, that'll probably be going up. And Mornington Crescent there. Dwarves get rune magic, they do. What personalized magic would you give the other big, small, non-magical race, the halflings? Yeah, so it's quite obvious that they've already almost got it in a couple of places, and they've got their own version of gastromancy, their own version of being able to use recipes to do shit. I see no reason to go further than that, and I don't think it should be a hubble bubble toil and trouble big pot of crazy magic spells kicking out. I think it should be much more what has already been shown with the halfling hot pot and a variety of other similar things, where they are just capable of creating stuff, dropping a little bit of their godly goodness in there, and you've got yourself something relatively unique that doesn't feel like it breaks them, and would turn the Warhammer halflings into something that was more than just shitty hobbits stealing some D&D tropes added on top. So I think that would probably do. I with thought I might come up with something better, but I'd probably stick with that, because it would also give you the little brother to the ogre big brother setup. The ogres and the halflings have always been sitting in each other's pockets, so I see no reason to ruin that or move away from that. Pardon me, just a big bash in the mic there. The old ones created both species at the same time, and they have always been intrinsically linked. So I think I would continue to mirror that link if I possibly could. Alrighty, just going to catch the last few, unless anyone throws any super chats. We'll probably bring this one to a shining end. So let's just have a quick look at any last questions popping up before I run away. Hi Andy, out of all the unexplored races or species that we have in Warhammer World, which do you think has the most potential? I personally think Koresh does. Love Lorebeards, by the way. I think Koresh is going to be fascinating. I think, for me, the one that has the most potential is potentially Ind, but it's also the biggest potential for being totally fucked up. Because you could do that one so wrong. I've got a lot of friends who come from that part of the world, and they have opinions, and their opinions are deep and good, and I'm afraid to say possibly not going to be addressed. So yeah, we'll see. I think that Koresh is good. Oh god, I want to see the Southlands done though. Q, if an elf and a dwarf get isekai'd into our world, how do they react to things like the International Space Station being a thing? Actually, I don't think that would be as much of a shocker for them as you might think. They're, after all, used to crazy magical shit. Any dent in the sense of superiority or the alien to phase them? Actually, no, I think the elves would feel deeply superior to us, even seeing all the crazy things that we can do, because most of what we can do, they can also do with their magic. The dwarves don't have that thing. They're very practical. They would not be happy with the poor quality, the shoddy work that they'd see on display. I'd be interested to see how they'd get on. But it would depend on the type of elf and the type of dwarf, because there's obviously lots of different type of dwarf and elf. But let's just say we go with the standard stereotype, our high elf emissary from Ulthuan, for example, or our old dwarf, a proper alt trommy, big long bearded dwarf coming in and viewing it. I think the dwarf would be full of curiosity and horror, and the elf would be I think still very superior. Because we are flawed in so many ways, and they could think of better ways to do it with magic. But we have done things that they have yet to do on a similar scale. But the elves have got much of what we have. They have instant telecommunication. They have visual telecommunication. They've got past of the old ones, which we have nothing that even comes close to. Oh, they've got lots of stuff. I mean, it would be interesting. But the overall cultural stuff, they would mostly look on with horror, I think. Mostly. Yeah. Okay, let's see if there's any other quick questions at the end there. Have I read the new Empire Man? Thanks, you Executor. No, I've not read it yet. I've not picked it up. I've got all of them bar that one. And having said that, I've not read the other Arcane Journals particularly deeply yet either. So I'm going to be doing that over the next few days. Quickly there from Mosscraft. Andy, what is the best way to start Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay? Starter kit, or do I need the rulebook or something else? The best way to start playing or start reading, the Fantasy rulebook is all the rules. The starter kit gives you enough to do everything that within a single city, but doesn't have rules for experience. It doesn't have rules for all the spells. It doesn't have all the rules. The best place is this Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay starter kit and the rulebook. Those two together is your best place. The rulebook will give you all the rules, and it'll give you a starter on the Reichland, and the starter kit will give you a place to play in Ubersreich in the Reichland, and it has enough detail inside the Ubersreich book for you to play for potentially years if you want to do so. There is tons in there, and it'll give you everything you need to get started. Ubersreich also has a ton of other expansions that go on top of that. Hey, Lohammer, quick question. Do you think the Dawi Chorfs should have blacksmith characters? Yeah. Yeah. Now, do I think they should have them in Warhammer per se? I mean, what are they going to do that others aren't going to do? Not necessarily. But if I'm looking at roleplay, like all the time, yes. Ricky Chapman, a friend of ours has offended Taal and wants to appease him. Is there any way to do so? Yes, Ricky Chapman. In fact, I wrote this directly into the book, which I happen to have here right now because I was checking something up just earlier. So the religion section inside Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4, which I wrote, has got a nice little bit about, here we go, Raya, and it should be just after Sigmar. There he is. The easy bit, common holy symbols, we don't need to worry about that. Common holy books, worshippers, holy sites, penances. So if you want to appease them, typical penances involve clearing diseased and mutated monsters from wild areas, replanting sacred trees, maintaining groves important to the cult. A cultist might also be ordered to climb a high mountain and leave a stone on a cairn at the top, or clear an obstruction at the top of a waterfall. Whatever the specific task that must be undertaken, Taal's penances almost always challenge the cultist to survive in the wild. There's also another little bit that's of use to you, which is the primary gods of the Empire on page 204, which tells you the offerings to make to properly appease the god. And Taal has got there land left wild, first kill from a hunt, and animals in general. So if you want to appease the god, there's your typical sacrifices, and there's some things that you can go and do. So hopefully that helped. I'm going to bring this comment up because that makes me smile. Hey Andy, I'm loving Dark Deeds. Yay! Is there any thought to adding an expansion or a map? We're going to have to sell a freaking ton of Dark Deeds for that to be the case. And we have yet to do so. We have sold a modest amount. We've sold a good amount, but not enough for us to reach the point of expansions. There's a part of us that wishes we just done it as a Kickstarter instead of selling it through the way we have. If we'd done it as a Kickstarter, we might have had a larger chunk of initial sales. But as it stands, we're not in a position where we're going to do an expansion. We have an expansion all lined up, potentially ready to go, but we have not reached the point where we think it's going to be financially viable to do so. So if you would like to see that, go out there, speak to your chums, get them all to buy their own copy, and have Modiphius get in contact with us and say, oh shit, we've run out of stock, we need to order another set, and have us go, oh really? Well, maybe now it's time for us to think about an expansion. But as it currently stands, that's probably not going to be the case. And yeah, they have telecom. Yeah, magic aircraft carriers. And yeah, I wouldn't blame them for the horror parts of our culture. Yeah, neither would I. And with that, we have arrived at the end of what was quite a fun little Q&A. Thanks very much for tuning in for Ask Andy Anything number, what is it, number 17 that we're at? Yes, I think it's number 17. We've done 17 of these. And the first one of 2025. I'll probably do another one the next week or two because they're always fun and you always come up with the coolest questions. And we always end up with some of the more unexpected stuff. I feel like I've missed some of the questions sitting up there. Dang it. As always, if I've missed any questions, apologies. Let's see if we can get them next time. And as always, if you haven't bought it already, do go buy yourself a copy of Dark Deeds. You can pick that up from modiphius.com if you are ordering from America, or modiphius.co.uk if you are ordering from the UK. That's the two areas. You can also pick them up in places like Amazon, apparently. So there might be some Amazon copies out there too. So beyond that, I'm going to just sit here, drink my ridiculously coloured juice, which obviously isn't really juice, but I'm Scottish. We call everything juice. And say thanks for one more week of awesomeness. I will see you next Wednesday for our stream about, we'll be publicly discussing that in a day or two. Something next Wednesday, 10 p.m. UK with Sotek. That will be on the Lawhammer channels. And then we'll see you again next Sunday, where we're going to be discussing finally Joseph Bugman, and that will be over on Lore Master of Sotek's channels. So other than that, it was a delight to see you all. Until next time, goodbye.